Moving on, I wanted to have a discussion about size. We talk about it every year, but this year in particular is fascinating to me from a size perspective because let's think about some of the best players in this draft. Connor Bedard, Matvey Michkov, Zach Benson, Will Smith, Ryan Leonard, Gabe Perreault, Andrew Crystal, Riley Height, Braden Yeager. A lot of these guys are under 6 feet tall. And if you've been watching the Stanley Cup playoffs, everybody's really been talking about how big Vegas is. And it is true. They're big, they're burly, they're hard to play against, and they are currently dominating the Stanley Cup final. Size matters. It does. I mean, you can't have a team that's all one thing or all this. You definitely need skill. There's certainly some players like a Jonathan Marchessault who doesn't necessarily have that size factor, that makes a significant impact in the playoffs. And so you can't forget that either. But I do think teams I think there's a pretty significant difference based on what I'm hearing from scouts between what the scouts have in terms of their higher picks, like the top tier picks, excluding guys like Michkov and Bedard, who are exceptional, Will Smith again, and Ryan Leonard, like they're kind of in that class. But I think some of the other players, guys like Zach Benson, Braden Yeager, even Gabe Perreault, Oliver Moore, all of those players that are kind of sub 6 foot players are candidates to go much lower than you're going to see them listed publicly. And on the mock draft, that's kind of what happened. I've got Zach Benson going 17th in this one. That's to Detroit. Number 18, Gabe Perreault to Winnipeg. Number 20, Yeager. So that's Seattle. So that's just based on the feel that I'm getting, is that a lot of these smaller players, while they're exceptional in terms of their offensive abilities, especially in the case of Benson and Perreault, there's still that concern that says how many guys, you have to be a pretty special player to play at that size effectively and be a producer at the NHL level. And when you're drafting in the top 15, top 20, you want players that are going to make a significant offensive impact. Now, we know from history that not everybody can do that in that range. But I'm telling you right now, these players, while I personally like them, I had Benson as a top 10 pick. I had Perreault very high. I had Yeager pretty high. Those are still the risks that teams are trying to manage and saying, what is the probability of that player panning out versus a Samuel Honzik, who's 6'3", a Matthew Wood, who's 6'3". And both of those players, it's not just that they're big, they're also very gifted offensively. Did they have the points and the production of some of the other players that we're talking about? They didn't, but they have that extra advantage. And I think teams are going to consider that. That's a thing. In this year's draft, we've talked a lot about the depth. There is a lot of depth. There's a lot of upside in this draft, but there's also a lot of risk because there's a lot of players that are smaller than NHL average that teams are going to have to make a very big decision on. I think that, I put Zach Benson in the top 10 knowing full well that there's probably a low chance that he goes in the top 10. I don't think he should go lower than the top 15, but in this mock draft, just based on the feel and the way the picks fell, I felt that was absolutely a possibility. So it's going to be fascinating to watch that kind of unfold because I think guys like Benson, like Perreault, and Yeager in particular are going to be players that can slink back a little bit further than you might expect. Same with guys like Andrew Crystal, Jaden Perron. I mean, players that, I might not have even had in the first round, like Perron, like Grayson Sachin, players like that, how many players, sub 6 foot players, are you going to see selected in the first round? I think this year will be a higher than average because that's just there are more and they're better than, in years previous. But that's a real discussion the teams are going to have. That's also why I had Axel Sandin Pellikka as the third defenseman taken, not the second, like a lot of people would have him. So that's why, these are the things that you think about when you put a mock draft together. I can't just think about the way that I would build a team. I'm trying to think about how NHL teams are doing it. And so that's why the rankings are very different from the mock draft. So, you can look at my top 100 on FloHockey and then look at the mock draft, and there is a wide variance between what I believe and what I also think could happen on draft day. So that's why mock drafts are really fun to put together, because you try to put yourself in, 32 team shoes and put it all together, and it's very difficult to do.